Clemson defensive lineman Bryan Bresee is one of those few projected can't-miss prospects coming out of high school that the nation will have a close and critical eye on at the collegiate level. A mountain of muscle and athleticism, Bresee certainly looks the part of the next it athlete, and his production early into his Clemson career suggests he's well on his way. All signs point to an NFL superstar in the making, but those are things you probably already know about the 19-year-old #1 recruit in the nation. Today we're going to take a look at the 10 things you don't know about Bryan Bresee. But before we get into that, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on this channel and all things football. All done? Alright, on to the list. Number 10. Bryan Bresee is a large man who could dunk a basketball. Not just dunk a basketball, he could catch a lob off the backboard and throw it down. I know what you're thinking, Bryan is a college athlete, dunking a basketball isn't that crazy, especially since he's 6'5", an inch shorter than Michael Jordan. But at 300 pounds, Bresee weighs more than most of the big men in basketball. Shaq was 325, so there are exceptions, but being only 6'5" means he still has to have a pretty good sized vertical to catch a lob off the backboard. Number 9. Bryan Bresee is already being compared to J.J. Watt. At Damascus High School in Maryland, Bryan Bresee was labeled the next J.J. Watt as our most unblockable forces on the defensive line fresh out of high school. Bresee was a level of dominant in high school where his athleticism looked effortless, as did Watt's, and while others may be considered the next Watt simply because they were the best in their school, Bresee's tape shows a person too talented to be playing in high school and maybe even the position. Like Watt, Bresee weighs around 290 to 300 pounds and has the frame and athleticism to either line up as a defensive end or defensive tackle. Bresee has the explosiveness to blow past linemen and the strength to bull rush them. Both Bresee and Watt played against underwhelming competition in high school, which is why Watt wasn't so heavily recruited. Unlike Watt, though, who was a 2-star recruit, Bresee was a 5-star recruit who was the #1 recruit in the country. Maybe scouts learned a thing or two from ranking Watt so low because of his competition and focused solely on Bresee's tape. Number 8. Bryan Bresee was able to bench 405 pounds at 17 years old. Just a year before putting up the 405 pounds on the bench, Bresee was only lifting 225 pounds. He said he was determined to get stronger and spent the year going as hard as possible, and before he knew it, he was able to add more and more plates to his workout. It's safe to say that at 17, Bresee was one of the strongest teenagers in the country, and if you watch the clip of him attempting his max, he did it with ease. Number 7. Bryan Bresee broke his hand in a high school game and kept playing. Well. During a semifinal game, Bresee broke his hand in the first half and stayed in the game to help Damascus High School beat Huntington. What makes the feat even more impressive is that Bresee had a sack after the injury and continued to wreak havoc on Huntington's offensive line. In case you were wondering, Bryan Bresee also played in a title game with a cast on his hand and never considered missing the game. Talk about tough. Damascus ended up winning the championship game, and Bresee ended up being his usually dominant self and even chipped in on offense with a rushing touchdown. Number 6. Clemson freshman defensive lineman Bryan Bresee said when he was younger, he watched highlight tapes of William Refrigerator Perry, and that watching somebody that large and athletic playing defensive tackle was amazing and inspiring to him. Bryan also liked the variety of ways Perry was used with Chicago and that he also got involved on offense. As we mentioned earlier, Bryan got a rushing touchdown in his high school championship game. One's left to wonder if that could have been by Bryan's own design after watching the Refrigerator often come in and do it back in the day. Number 5. Bresee comes from a very athletic family. Being 6'5", nearly 300 pounds, and super athletic, Bryan Bresee may look like the prototype of the 2020 defensive lineman that's been created in a lab somewhere. However, it's all in the genes. Bresee comes from a family of college athletes. His father, a college football player, his mother, a college basketball player, and his 2 sisters are college basketball players also. Bresee claims that his family is very competitive and that helped push him in athletics and helped him hate losing. Whether it was just running down the street or doing something competitive, he said his hatred for losing bloomed early and it helped mold him into the athlete he is today. To give you an idea of just how competitive his family is, during a pickup game with his family, Bryan was dribbling full speed down the court and his sisters stepped in front of him to take a charge with no refs around, and Bryan reportedly ran over her like a Mack truck. Number 4. Bresee might have tricked his way into wearing the number 11. Bryan had to do some maneuvering to get the number he now wears at Clemson. According to Bryan, I had to make some trades to get this number. When I decided to commit, there were already a bunch of people who had chosen numbers. I look at all the numbers still available and I saw 45, and I knew linebacker Sergio Allen wore that in high school. He had already chosen 11, so I was going to see if I could kind of make something happen. I get 45 and then I text Sergio, "Hey man, I knew you wore 45 in high school. I don't think it looks too good on D lineman." And he was like, "Yeah, you're right. I'll keep 45. I was so thankful I kind of got lucky. Smooth, Bryan. Smooth. After getting his coveted number 11, he claimed he chose the number because former Clemson superstar Isaiah Simmons wore it and he wanted to carry that on. We're sure the number 11 is in good hands, Bryan. Number 3. Don't expect to see Bryan dunking anytime soon. Before spring practices with Clemson, Bryan was doing something he loves to do in his downtime, play basketball. Bresee claims that Coach Dabo Swinney encourages his athletes to have the most normal college experience possible and that getting in a game of hoops is well within reason when it comes to Coach Swinney. However, while playing basketball during some downtime, Bresee went up for a dunk and came down funny on his knee and injured it. He only had to miss a couple of days, but Bryan learned the lesson and was happy to escape with just a minor injury. He says after the incident that he's decided to hang up the basketball shoes for good. Probably a great idea when you're trying to be a generational talent on a defensive line. Number 2. Bryan's older sister almost got him to commit to Georgia. That's right, before Bryan became Clemson's next high-profile defensive player assumed to be great, his older sister Bailey pushed for Bryan to take his greatness on over to Georgia after being familiar with the campus and culture herself. Bryan says his family was very supportive during the selection process and he takes his family's advice very seriously. At the end of the day, they knew that the decision was Bryan's and said no matter what he chose, they'd show up and that helped with the selection process. After Bresee's Georgia visit, he and Coach Kirby Smart remained in communication, but at the end of the day, Bresee ended up committing to Clemson. Perhaps Coach Smart was talking with the wrong Bresee and should have gotten in Bryan's sister Bailey's ear to get in Bryan's. Number 1. Bryan Bresee is a workout machine. We've talked about Bryan's strength at 17 years old being able to bench 405 pounds, but Bryan is far from a one-trick pony and is said to be able to squat 645 pounds and power clean 315. His power clean max was when he was a high school junior and he hasn't really tried to max out on that again, but who knows if he's improved on that number. Improvement is the name of the game to Bryan, and the Clemson defensive lineman said that he's able to reach these weightlifting feats by pushing himself when he feels good and before he gets too exerted. By pushing himself to reach new maxes in his different workouts, Bryan has been able to chart his progress and identify if his workout regimen has been improving his strength or if it's time to switch it up. Whatever Bryan's doing, it's working, and over the last 2 years he's been able to improve his max and bench to 455 pounds. Alright sports fans, that's it for our list on the next It Man, Bryan Bresee, and if there's anything you've learned from this list, hopefully it's that Clemson has a potential monster on their defensive line, and that this 19-year-old is set to take college sports by storm. Is there anything we've left off the list? Drop us a comment and let us know. Any lists you'd like to see? Give us some feedback. If you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with this channel. Until next time.